Right, so quite a lot of by-elections have been triggered across the country, particularly of Labour seats, where in no small part the imposition of Starmer-centric parliamentary candidates has meant that such people have been picked from amongst various councils. Therefore, where said councillors have been successfully elected now as MPs, nodding through all of Starmer's noxious moves from keeping kids hungry to freezing pensioners, council seats have become vacant. And now that we're 2 months on, a glut of replacements have now been elected. Last night, there were no fewer than 6 Labour defences declared, and given how Starmer has wasted no time showing the country how foolish they were to back him, how would Labour do? Well, already the trend shown should be alarming, the Labour right, because even where they held on, their share of the vote collapsed significantly, and still 8 months away from the next round of national local elections, if things are this bad for Labour electorally now, already, how much worse will they get following what is expected to be an awful budget for all and a very tough winter for many? Right, so, by-elections. We're not in local election season just yet. We're still only just getting over a general election, and yet we've got loads of by-elections popping up all over the place. There were actually 8 seats contested at local council level last night, but 6 were Labour defences, mostly caused by councillors readily abandoning their local council duties to go full-time as MPs. Not every councillor that has been elected as an MP has done this, incidentally. Some have chosen to stay on until a more convenient time, reducing their duties but not going entirely. My own MP is one such case as this, and indeed we are in Cornwall for one of these Labour defences as well. But a result that is absolutely nothing for Labour to celebrate anywhere at all. We're in London, Cornwall, Worcestershire, Yorkshire and Surrey for these, so a good spread across the country, I thought. Cornwall Council, Bromsgrove Council, Hartlepool Council, Worthing Council and Westminster Council twice are the 6 we're looking at, and it wasn't a good night anywhere for Labour, really. We'll start with where Labour hung on, and we'll start in Cornwall, in which case the by-election in Falmouth, as it was, to replace Jane Kirkham, now the local MP, a Starmer loyalist. I know Jane from the past. It doesn't surprise me one iota she's voted with Starmer all the way thus far either. She's certainly no fan of mine either, though I possibly imagine why. Anyway, no Tory standing on this occasion, which might actually mask some of the damage done to Labour's result, despite it being truly awful. Because although Labour held against a Lib Dem and Green candidate here, their vote share collapsed by nearly 20 points, by slightly more actually than the vote share the Tories got, full stop, when they stood in this division last time round. Turnout was down. Nothing unusual too much in that outside of normal election cycles, is there? Especially after a recent major election, a general election. So perhaps the Tories all just stayed at home, not liking the candidates on offer here, not thinking much of Labour, Lib Dem or Green. But perhaps Labour voters did as well. Let's zip up to the other end of the country next then, and the Hartlepool by-election. This was held in Burn Valley, which has also lost its Labour councillor Jonathan Brash to Parliament. And there are similarities here to the situation in Cornwall too, though. Again, there was no Conservative candidate. Can they not get anyone to stand for them anymore, or is their own party leadership contest demonstrating that they are, to all intents and purposes, completely rudderless right now? Not that I put the rudder in the hands of any of the foul entities vying to become the next Tory leader. They are all a rancid bunch. But anyway, Labour again can't really celebrate this result either. They might not have had a Tory to face, but they did have a hard right Tory running against them this time in the form of Reform UK Limited, as well as a Green and a Lib Dem. As you might expect, the Reform candidate, happily it appears, hoovered up that Tory vote, as well as half of Labour's, as despite hanging on, Labour's vote share fell 21.5% here, with both the Lib Dems and Greens making gains as well, though these appear to be academic since they didn't actually stand previously. Turnout was yet again down, as is always expected. But we can't say it is Tory voters necessarily staying at home this time, because Reform took nearly 40% of the vote. It's also well outside margins of just assuming Labour voters stayed at home as well. They clearly found other options here. You can see the trend already beginning to build here, though, can't you? Because these are big losses on Labour's part, despite them clinging on. These are formerly very safe seats, therefore, that are looking decidedly less so now. They aren't a party that typically takes much of the Tory vote anyway, Labour, as Starmer has desperately tried and largely failed to win over, tried over and over again to take that Tory vote. And even where he did get some of them going into the general election, his claim of change might have convinced a few to lend their votes back then. But having not delivered on any of that, and with many traditional Tory voters largely older, the attacks on pensioners will not have gone down well at all, in particular with them, not that it has with anyone, frankly, with a pang of conscience. Let's move to London next and the two by-elections in Westminster, because this is where Labour held on in one seat. It's the last one they held on to. They lost the other. So we can directly compare those results in a localised area here, as well as with the national picture from other by-elections we've looked at already and are still to come. Harrow Road is where Labour held on, following the departure of Councillor Tim Rocker for Parliament again. It was one of their biggest losses of vote share last night anywhere, though, and the only reason they've held on is a measure of how safe a Labour seat this one actually is. Because Labour secured what would normally be a respectable 44.2% of the vote here. But when you consider they lost over 27% of their vote share and fell to that should send shockwaves. Notably, the Tories also stood this time. They lost ground too, it must be noted on last time as well. The Lib Dems also lost ground. But a decent showing by both the Greens, who came second, becoming an ever bigger force in London as they appear to be coming, as well as a decent showing from Galloway's Workers' Party too, who came third, show standing for real change wins real results. And there appears to be a turning on the three main parties here at any rate, which is great to see and hopefully bodes well for the future. But that is where Labour successfully defended seats. The other three, they lost last night. Also in Westminster was the seat for West End up for grabs, following Labour's Jessica Toll heading off to be an MP as well. And Labour managed to lose this seat to, of all parties, the Tories. It was always a marginal seat, this one. But where the Tories gained just over 8% to win the seat, nothing to shout about really, Labour lost nearly 11% of the vote, and with the Lib Dem vote halved, and the Greens winning just over 7% of the vote themselves, it seems a story of apathy was the winner here as well. It's truly disappointing to see the Tories winning again already. Come on, people. But it's also an indictment of what 2 months of Starmer is delivering now for the country, how fed up people are. And the next by-election story follows a similar theme. We're staying in the southeast. Worthing in Surrey saw a defence of the division of Marine deserted by the now Labour MP for the area, Becky Cooper. You tend to think of Surrey as Tory country anyway, so perhaps the Tories winning this seat, or winning it back maybe, not the biggest surprise in this list. But Labour's vote share collapsed again by over 19%, where the Tories only gained 9% of that to take it. It's not like for like here. The other half of Labour's vote share here taken by Reform UK, so arguably the Tory vote was split. But given Labour voters and Tory voters are rarely interchangeable, though perhaps have been this past general election more than most, people desperate for change and lending a vote, now seeing they aren't getting the change they wanted, perhaps Tory voters are turning out again, and it is Labour voters staying at home. Whatever the reason, the ultimate result is Labour's vote share going down everywhere, and by a lot. Lastly, and out of traditional Tory heartlands this time, is the by-election Bromsgrove, the division of Sidemore there, and for once, not due to the desertion of a Labour councillor for Westminster, just a plain ordinary resignation. But when you're in the Midlands, you do tend to expect Labour to do well there. To see their biggest loss of the lot should be putting the frighteners on instead. Labour lost nearly 30% of their vote share, falling to just 16.6%, and came third behind both the Tories, who made a small gain, and the Lib Dems, who actually won the seat, gaining nearly 25% of the vote, virtually exclusively at the expense of Labour, to end up winning more than half the count, coming in on 52.6% overall, nearly double what the Tories got, let alone Labour. So it's now gone from a safe Labour seat to being a fairly safe Lib Dem seat. That's mind-boggling. That's a huge loss. And taking all six collectively, Labour is averaging a 19-point loss across the board in all of these seats. That's the trend. And we're looking at all corners of the country here. We're only 2 months after people voted in the general election, voted Labour in, voted Starmer in with that massive majority. Apathy, sure, tends to be highest at this sort of point in time when people have just been and voted nationally and don't really want to go again. But considering the scale of these losses, despite that, and considering the local elections in May will garner higher turnout, on average, looking at the turnouts in these by-elections, voter turnout is down by anywhere between a third and a half. And also bear in mind the hardship that will be inflicted on many people going through this winter, and who knows who else, and in what areas the rest of us will face certain hardship, as Rachel Reeves gleefully draws up what looks to be the biggest horror for many this Halloween with their austerity-laden budget. Labour's numbers, already tumbling hard, look set to fall a lot harder yet. A lot of people are getting very angry already that again, yet again, we've been duped by lying politicians, and the thought of having to wait 5 years for change again, Nah, we can give them a bloody nose that the locals are so inclined and put the frighteners up them as to what they can expect in 5 years' time if they don't shape up a bit. Surely that's the least Labour deserve under Starmer right now, isn't it? Meanwhile, of course, another source of national ire is Starmer and his freebies, not least the fact the mainstream media has finally been forced, thanks to news outlet Open Democracy, exposing it, that Labour has received the biggest donation in its history, and it's from a hedge fund representing the interests of fossil fuels, arms manufacturers, and big banksters. I can't imagine what they want in return from Starmer's Labour, can you? Shows this Labour government are Labour in name only, doesn't it? Get the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. And I'll hope to catch you on the next video. Cheers, folks.